So I've been doing this a while. I started programming in 1986 when I taught myself Turbo Pascal. I was in high school then. If you count BASIC, which I don't like to, although we'll come back to that, I actually started programming in 1982. I got my first programming job in 1989. Many of the companies I work for don't exist anymore. Many of the technologies I've learned, no one uses anymore. I've had to learn new languages, new frameworks, new programming styles, new tools over and over during the past 40-ish years. No matter what, AGI or no AGI, failing some catastrophe that wipes out all electricity on the planet or something, tech just always progresses. Being a computer professional means having to keep up with changes in tech or risk leaving left behind. Although there have been certain tools and technologies I've generally avoided, it's rarely been for aesthetic reasons. It's more for market reasons. For example, I try not to program in JavaScript or TypeScript, not because I dislike JavaScript, although I do, but because the market for JS coders has always been way too crowded. I don't always learn the hot new thing, although I try to at least be aware of them. But I do look at what the market seems to want and what I think will be popular. You never know for sure what's worth learning, except in hindsight. So I just give it my best guess and dive in. I'm confident that even if I'm wrong, and even if I spend time learning a tech that turns out to be a dud, there will be something I learn in the process that will be useful in the long term. This is another one of those points in my career, when it's time for me to learn a new set of skills and a new set of tools. This time I'm teaching myself how to use PyTorch and LLMs and that kind of thing. I thought I'd talk today about how I'm learning and how I'm working with the new tech these days, some resources I've been finding useful, and how programmers have to reinvent themselves over and over again through a long career. But before we get started, I have a confession to make. I'll talk more about why in a little bit, but I hope I don't get canceled for this, but I hate Python. I've always hated Python. I will always hate Python. I use it because it's got a lot of libraries that are very useful, but it's such a shit. This is the Internet of Bugs. My name is Carl, and I hate Python. Today, we're going to talk about programming reinventing itself as a career, how technology changes over the course of years, how you have to keep reinventing yourself, some new programming technologies and techniques I've been finding useful lately, and what I think that might lead to in the future. I've adapted to a lot of different ways of programming over the years. In the early 1990s, it was Windows, C++, x86 assembler, and some scientific programming, Fortran, IDL, which was a Fortran-like language that had matrices and tensors in it. The late 90s, I was into security stuff, a lot of C. I did some Unix porting. Basically, a bunch of different vendors used to have their own version of Unix, and code that ran on one wouldn't necessarily run on another, so we could actually get paid to make code that ran on one version of Unix a different version of Unix. Not that that happens these days. And actually, even some BASIC. I ported the CompUSA, if you ever heard of them. It was a retail store that sold computers and stuff. I ported the CompUSA point of sale system from AIX to HPUX. So from IBM's version of Unix to HP, Hewlett-Packard's version of Unix. And it was written in BASIC. It was written in a specific kind of BASIC. I think it was called IMS BASIC, that had line numbers, but it also had a way to talk to a database, IMS, I think, something like that. And it was terrifying. I might complain about it later in some other video, but that's as much about BASIC as I want to say at the moment. In the 2000s, early 2000s, I was at Netspend. The app there was in Java, but I wrote a bunch of networking code, SNA, IP bridge code that we used to talk to the mainframes at the banks. That was in C. And then I became a manager for a while, did scripting stuff. I did a lot of Visual Basic for applications, believe it or not, to like populate PowerPoint charts from metrics and project plans and that kind of thing. Then I got into C#.NET on top of IIS, doing web stuff. I did some Java, Hadoop, Tomcat stuff, Ruby on Rails. Then in 2008, when the App Store dropped, I started learning Objective-C for the iPhone. I had touched Objective-C a little bit in college. There was a Next in one of my labs, but I never got too far into it until 2008-ish. After I'd done iPhone stuff for a while, I learned the Android SDK, which is back to Java. I did some embedded device C, And then I went to work for Amazon, which was Objective-C and Java and some other stuff. Then in, I guess, 2014, Apple invented Swift. I spent some time doing on it. On the device, I spent some time in IBM's cloud group doing Swift on the server and AngularJS. Parts of that were fun. I did a project with Dart Flutter. It was a mobile Internet of Things project for Residio, which was the residential spinoff of Honeywell, doing mobile apps plus devices like thermostats and water shutoff valves and that kind of thing. That was kind of interesting. And then when the pandemic hit, I spent some time helping a group that did online medical training because their traffic went way up when the pandemic happened. And it was React Native, some other stuff on the server I'd rather not mention because, and then after that, I went and did a C++ peer-to-peer video streaming service. It was basically like a Twitch competitor kind of thing. And there was a Solidity piece to that. If you don't know what Solidity is, don't worry about it. It's probably never going to come back. That's just a broad overview. Been a bunch of other stuff squeezed in there too that wasn't quite as prominent. There have been things I liked, things I've hated, but generally I've made decisions based on what problem I wanted to solve and not what tool I wanted to use to solve it. I'm not currently interested in becoming a dedicated machine learning engineer. I just want to know enough about it to add it to my toolbox of software techniques. And I don't need to learn any math techniques. I have a physics degree, so I'm familiar enough that I can follow the papers, so your mileage may vary. This is a work in progress. I'm not an expert on any of these topics. I'm still in the middle of learning some of this stuff. A lot of these tools are changing really rapidly. So I might say or recommend something now that I learn later is a bad idea or that changes. So if you're watching this much after the summer of 2024, the early summer, check the description or a pinned comment to see if I've added updates since this video was published. So first off, let me say that what I'm not going to talk about today is what I do when I've been brought in to work on an existing code base. When I'm doing that, I try to match the style of the code I'm changing and add to and use the same kind of tools that already exist, the same processes that already exist. That's not what I'm going to be talking about today. A lot of the stuff I'm talking about today wouldn't really work in a existing environment. This is all greenfield stuff. And not everything I'm going to talk about today is appropriate for every kind of context. So let me start with some fantastic advice I got about 14 years ago from a blog post from a guy named Steve Streeting. He used to work at Ogre 3D, which was a graphics engine thing. I'll put a link below. Steve, I met him once many years later. He had some kind of health problem. I don't remember exactly. He ended up, if you've heard of him, he ended up writing a thing called SourceTree that became Atlassian's Git client and Mercurial client. So if you've heard of him, it might have been from that. Anyway, so he had some health problems, and he had to make himself stop programming every so often to take rest breaks. And he was a programmer like me that spent a lot of time, in the zone. And so he had to work out a way to stay productive when he was having to stop and get up and walk around and having a lot of frequent interruptions. Now, about the time that I read this post, my daughter had gotten old enough that she could open the door to my office. And I didn't want her to grow up thinking that she wasn't as important as my keyboard. So I wanted to be able to stop and talk to her or whatever. And I found that when I got interrupted, I couldn't remember where I had left off and what I had been doing. And it took me forever to get back in the zone. So it was really timely advice. And then, surprisingly enough, that advice became way more useful just in the last few months. And I'll tell you why. So the basic idea of this technique is to maintain state outside of your head at all times. So when you sit down to program, you start by making yourself a note of what you want to accomplish. Periodically go back to that note and update it to reflect your progress. Add new things. When you think of something else you want to do, you go back and put it in that note, or you put a note somewhere else. Then when you get interrupted, you come back, you look at your notes, you see what you've checked off, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, that's what I was doing. Makes it a lot easier, at least for me. When I'm doing a corporate setting, I usually keep that state in like a bug tracking system. Unfortunately, that usually ends up being Jira, but I'm not going to start complaining about that right now. When I'm coding for myself, though, I rarely bother with bug tracking, so I tend to sit down to program, open up a file, and start by creating comments that describe what I'm about to do. Aside from that, there's this practice called literate programming. Donald Knuth, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, K-N-U-T-H, he pioneered it in the 80s. It's a far more comprehensive and thorough version of what I do, but it's a much better thing for you to learn if you want to try that. So read up on literate programming. I'll put some links in the description if you want to know a better way of doing what I do. I do a much simpler version of this. It's a shame that literate programming never caught on, but the Agile people directly contradicted it by saying that we didn't care about documentation. And then when Agile took off, literate programming just became a footnote. I hope it'll make a resurgence. The Jupyter Notebook stuff is kind of like it, and it's a really good start. But there's a whole new value proposition now. Because it turns out these days, when you start with a comment that says this function is going to accept the arguments A and B and then do X and then return Y and then hit return, GitHub CoPilot or whatever AI you're using offers to write the function for you. And personally, I think this is fantastic, mostly. I've programmed in so many languages at this point. I know that people really care about specific languages and they're really excited about them and they like to argue about syntax and what languages are better. And I just don't care anymore. I just don't. I want to be very clear, this is not a commercial. This video is not sponsored by GitHub CoPilot or anyone. I'm not including affiliate links. So any ads you see on this video are added by YouTube and not selected or endorsed by me. Everything I'm going to mention is stuff I'm actually using, often even stuff I'm paying for out of my own pocket. Can't guarantee it will be a good fit for you, but I can promise you that everything I'm going to say in this video is my honest belief to the best of my knowledge. I have no incentive to lie to you, and it's all stuff I actually use myself. So I find that not having to care about syntax anymore is just a luxury, again, mostly. The downside of having the AI actually deal with the syntax for you is that it makes it even harder for you to do stupid leak coding problems. And it makes it even harder to get through somebody's interview coding tests, and you end up failing out even faster than you would otherwise. For a lot of people, that is a real downside. And I get that. I'm at a point in my career where I mostly do higher level consulting gigs, so I no longer really chase roles where memorizing code syntax is that relevant, but not everybody's at that point. I said in one of my other videos that there's this problem where the most important thing for you to actually learn how to do is not the actual syntax part, because AI is good at that. And the thing that's actually really important to do is the higher level stuff. Unfortunately, for interviews, exactly the opposite is true. I'm sorry about that. I wish I had a magic wand to make that get better. I am still going to be working on the Interviewing is Broken series. I've got the third one in the pipeline. So interviewing just sucks. But if you can get past the interview problem, coding by starting by creating a bunch of comments feeds into my previous video where I talked about how doing the work of figuring out what the program needs to do and not so much worrying about the details of the syntax is the more important part of programming, and this technique feeds right into that. So now I do the thinking work. I create the structure for what the pieces of the program I want to do. I document them kind of as I go, and I delegate all the minutiae to the AI. Now, CoPilot gets a lot wrong, and that's okay. The parts it gets wrong are generally the functionality parts, and I can generally correct for that. What it tends to do a pretty good job of, not always, but what it tends to do a pretty good job of is worrying about the syntax. The problem is, it doesn't always get the syntax right, and honestly, there's just no excuse for GitHub CoPilot or ChatGPT or whatever for generating code that has syntax errors in it, because unlike the, hey, does this program do what it's supposed to do thing, there's no ambiguity about whether it compiles or not, or whether there's syntax errors in it or not. It's really, really easy to understand how you would just train an AI not to generate code that doesn't compile. The fitness function for that's really simple, so I don't understand why that doesn't happen, but whatever, sorry. But I'm just very disappointed every time it creates something that doesn't compile, because there's just no good reason for that. Thing is, no matter how much I cringe when it gets the basic syntax wrong, it's still preferable to having to cringe every time I have to end a loop by deleting the tab at the beginning of the line. I'm sure the Python lovers are already in the comments yelling at me, but I don't care. The first time I ever saw Python was on a project called Sprint Internet Passport in the mid to late 90s. I was in San Jose, and then the project wrapped up in Kansas City. I was trying to fix what was an operations problem. I was not actually a developer on that project. I was a sysadmin, network admin guy. And there was something that was wrong, and nobody could figure out what was going on, and I was digging and trying to figure out what was going on. And it turned out that what had happened was that there was some Python code that I had not written and never seen before. I'd never seen Python before. And something had happened, and there was a nested loop, and like for every mailbox, for every message in the mailbox, do this. And then, or every unread message in the mailbox, do this. And then the last line of the inner loop was actually outdented by a space. And so only the first unread message of every mailbox on every pass got processed. And if you got more than one message in the same, in between the batches running, then the second one, or the second, third, whatever, all but the first one would not get processed. And it was such a nightmare bug because most people only got one message per mailbox per batch run. And so most of the time we didn't see there was a problem at all. And every once in a while we would get one and it was like, what the hell? Trying to figure out what was going on with that was a nightmare. Oh man, well, that bug was awful. And I will never forgive Python for it. Just, I don't care what you think. I'm never going to forgive Python for it. I judge code, architecture, frameworks, languages, not by how clean or pretty they are, how easy they are to write, how easy they are to grade when they get printed out on dead trees. I grade them on how easy they are to debug when something inevitably goes wrong. And on that point, Python is objectively one of the very worst languages I've ever dealt with. But a tool is a tool, and Python is a tool. And an ugly, uncomfortable screwdriver is still much better to tighten screws than the nicest possible hammer or a really cool chainsaw. And if you're teaching yourself machine learning these days, Python is really the tool you need. And having CoPilot and MyPy makes dealing with Python much less obnoxious these days than it's ever been before. In fact, I think this is kind of a peek into the future. So I can imagine a time not long from now when it really doesn't matter what programming language you want to use to write stuff. The same way that I can read YouTube comments that are in a language that I don't know, I can read tweets, social media posts in languages that were created in languages that I have no idea about. I think it will be possible for us to have something that translates from, Ruby to Python, or, C# to Java, or Java to C#. I do this in small chunks sometimes. I will take a block and I will tell it GitHub CoPilot or ChatGPT 4.0 or Llama 3, hey, take this Ruby code and convert it to Python because I'd rather write it in Ruby. And then I just dump it into the IDE. That's cool. It makes the leak code interview things even less useful, as if that was possible. But I'm not going to let myself start complaining about whiteboarding again, because that's going to be in another video and I'll be here all day. So at the moment, I'm working my way through Stanford professor Andrew Ng. I'm probably going to butcher a bunch of names now. I'm hoping that one's right, or close to right. There's a class on Coursera via Stanford University called Machine Learning Specialization. That class has come really highly recommended from a bunch of different places. I have no reason to believe it's not the best starting place there is. I've been told that several times by several different people. That said, I'm hating the class so far. I'm finding it so boring, but I am learning things I didn't know and that I do need to know. So I'm going to get through the class. I'm going to do all 3 sections. I'm going to do the whole thing. Thing is, it's not about the class. It's about me. That's why I hate it. I tend to be a teacher's nightmare, and a lot of people that do things the way I do are also teacher's nightmares. So let me explain. So my advice on learning a new programming language is always find a pet project or a work project that needs to get written with that language or framework that you want to learn. And then power through building that thing, or at least the first version of that thing. And then use whatever searching or copy and pasting, Stack Overflow, AI, whatever it is you need. And then use your desire to get that project done to motivate you to keep going and to learn the language. Then when you've gotten to a point where you feel like you've accomplished something, you've got your 1.0 out or your MPV out or whatever, then you go back and read a book or take a class or get a certification or do something to fill in the gaps about the things that you didn't end up needing to get used in the learning project. I find that for most people, doing that project makes it interesting enough for them to keep going. And then when they actually go to the point where they're learning the language formally in a class or a book or something, they have enough information and they remember enough stuff that they were doing when they were working on their project, that they have like a structure to hang all the new things on, and it's a lot easier to remember what you learned in the class. There are going to be things that are boring because you learned them when you were doing your project, and that's kind of a bummer. But you need to go through some kind of a formal process, at least in my opinion, because otherwise there will be pieces of the language or pieces of the framework that you just never have touched and don't know anything about because it wouldn't happen to be relevant for the particular project you were working on. And so you need to do something. If you do it the other way, which is what a lot of people do, take the class or you take the book first, a lot of it is new to you, and that's kind of cool. But in my experience, when you get to the end of the class or the book or whatever, a lot of what you read or saw has gone in one ear and out the other because you didn't have a way to apply it and you weren't typing it and you weren't trying to use it. It doesn't stick, at least for me. And so I learn a lot better if I do a project first and then I go back and do the formal, thorough bit later. Not everybody's like that, but most of the people I've talked to that have tried that seem to prefer that. So that's what I've done. I built a crappy kind of half-working Python PyTorch app. What it does, it fetches all of the comments from all of my YouTube videos, and then it like summarizes them and it categorizes them and it tries to guess which ones I'm going to want to reply to, and it tries to guess based on the replies I've had already, what I might want to reply to the one that I'm looking at the moment. It's an interesting little idea. As a YouTube creator tool, it's complete garbage. It gets things wrong all the time. It does not do a good job of predicting what I want. It puts just horrible recommendations for what I would say. It's basically a complete waste of time. But as a test bed or a proof of concept for me to use to see how LLMs work, it's been fantastic. And I'm going to keep working on it. I doubt it will ever see the light of day. I doubt it will ever actually net save me time, even outside of the, so the not counting the programming time, just the amount of time I spend with it, I probably could do a better job if I was just looking at the comments raw. But it's a great learning experience from a programming standpoint, so I'm going to stick with it. It's a great sandbox to play in. Anyway, so going back to resources. So I said that Andrew Ng's class was highly recommended. I'm going to blow a bunch of these names too, so I apologize in advance. But I'll put all the links in the description and I'll put the names on the screen so you can at least read what I'm mispronouncing. So to start off, let me recommend a set of neural network videos from a channel called 3 Blue 1 Brown. I recommended that channel before. It's probably my very favorite channel on all of YouTube. I'll link to the playlist for that series down in the description. It's just fantastic. And next, I want to recommend AndrejKarpathy's channel. He's a former senior director of AI at Tesla, has a lot of watch me code this machine learning concept while I explain it to you videos, and they're just invaluable. They're great. Boris, I want to say Meinardus. He's German. My German is non-existent. My Russian basically hasn't been used since the Cold War, so I'm not going to be good with these names. Boris is a researcher and a student in Germany. His channel has a lot of really practical videos. They're under 15 minutes. They pack a ton of information. So they're really great for, I've got a little bit of time, I want to learn something. They're not like Andrew's. Andrew's are far more in depth. ArtemKirsanov, I'm going to say, is a PhD student in neuroscience at NYU. Has a biophysics undergrad degree. He has some great information and some great animations on the intersection between neuroscience and LLMs and biophysics and that kind of thing. His channel is just great. There's I guess a blog called MachineLearningStreetTalk that's mostly interviews, and they've got some great interviews. They're very long, or at least all the ones I've liked have been very long, all the ones that looked interesting enough for me to actually watch. They're a big time investment, but they're really useful for some people. I've linked to one of their great videos below. It's with a guy who wrote a book on deep learning. It's really, really good. And then finally, there's a guy named Dr. Mike Pound. He's a professor and researcher from the University of Nottingham. I'm probably pronouncing Nottingham wrong too. He works on computer vision and computer security stuff. He spends time on a couple of channels. One of them is called Computerphile. And the other one is David Bombal, I think is his name. Again, I'll put all links in all of these in the description. And then one more quick kind of interesting recommendation before I let you go. I have switched to Perplexity.ai for most of my web searches now, and I'm finding it really helpful, way better than Google. It's different in that instead of in search terms, you ask it what you want answered, and it gives you an answer. The good news is it gives you citations. So it's not always correct, but it's really easy to just click on the thing that says, this is where I got the answer, and look and go, no, that's not the right answer. It's getting me into the mindset of asking and not searching, and that's great. Again, this isn't sponsored or paid. There was I'll see if I can find it. There was a talk that Steve Jobs gave where he talked about how when we get into a new medium, what we keep trying to do is what the last medium had. And so like the first television shows were like radio shows, they just pointed a camera at people and filmed. And that the medium doesn't really get a chance to take off, and you're not doing a good job of using it until you get to the point where you're disconnected from the old way of doing things. And Perplexity is doing a really good job of helping me get over thinking about things in terms of web searching and thinking of in terms of what I wanted in the first place was to get the question answered. Real quick, I have played with ChatGPT 4.0 that just came out recently. I have been comparing it to Perplexity. Perplexity is way better for the actual answers that I get. The multimodal stuff on ChatGPT 4.0 is kind of cool, but I find it disappointing because we had preprocessors that did a bunch of that stuff already. For people that have never actually plugged a text or speech-to-text engine into the front of ChatGPT 4 Turbo and then had the answer get turned back to speech, it probably seems really cool. For me, it's not that exciting, except it's really fast now. It's really fast now, and that's incredible. That's so useful. They did a really great job on that, and that's the thing I'm really excited about for ChatGPT 4.0. But in terms of the answers that I get, it's still not great. It really hasn't, for the stuff I've been asking it, at least it hasn't changed much from 4 Turbo, which really didn't change that much from 4. So anyway, I'll be talking more about ChatGPT 4.0 in the future. I'm going to have to because people won't stop asking me about it until I do. But the short version is I'm not finding it a giant leap. So we'll talk about that later. Anyway, so hopefully you find at least some of that useful between the talking about how you have to bounce between different technologies in a career, or how I think that languages are going to kind of be obsolete, or how I'm learning to program with ChatGPT, Github CoPilot. If you have other recommendations, please put them in the comments. I have learned a ton from the comments. The MachineLearningStreetTalk video that I linked and the ArtemKirsanov videos, both of those are recommended by folks in the comments on one of these videos. I'll link to those comments below too. So if you have a particularly strong recommendation, please let me know. If you have a particular strong objection to something I did recommend, please let me know that in the comments too, and we'll hopefully have some good threads on good things to be using as learning resources right now. Except for the Python thing, there's this old joke, trying to convince me to like Python is just going to waste your time and ignore the pig. So just remember, the internet is full of bugs. Anyone who says different is probably trying to convince you that you should be programming in Python. Let's be careful out there.